Hi, and welcome to Episode 1 of the Running Out of Space podcast, a show about collectors, their collections, and how they make room for it all in their lives. I'm Adam Bortnik, and I've been a collector since I was a child. It began with stickers, which led to comics, which led to toys, sneakers, posters, pins, wine, and on and on and on. Taking a wide-angle view of my passion for obsessive ownership, I've come to see how my collections have become intertwined with my personality and sense of identity. Speaking with other collectors on the internet and in real life, I've come to see that I'm not alone. The Running Out of Space podcast is a celebration of the spirit that unites all collectors. Because it doesn't matter if you collect paintings, watches, stamps, cars, guitars, or Barbie dolls, there is a common component within the collector themselves that transcends the object collected. Though the trophies may be different, the hunters are more similar than they know. My first guest is Mikhail Bortnik, who was at the forefront of the streetwear reemergence of the 2000s, co-founding the brand MISHKA NYC. He's gone on to launch a new streetwear brand, Psychic Hearts, and also works as an associate director of strategy at Complex Media. Today I'm going to be talking with him about his collection of vintage comic book t-shirts. So here he is, Mikhail Bortnik. When did you kind of start collecting things, whether or not it was an apparent choice?
Oh, like in elementary school.
And what do you remember what it was?
Action figures and comic books, and then trading cards as well.
Do you still collect any of those things?
Not actively, it depends on if I see something and I want to pick it up. I tend to move out of collecting things when it doesn't become fun anymore, when it turns into a whole thing where people get into it for the wrong reasons. It becomes more difficult to keep up with it. I generally collect things for the passion of it, kind of exciting me. I'm not collecting something because I want a bunch of people. Could because I want to feel part of a large group. I'm collecting it because I have a personal attachment to whatever it is.
So when did you get into your t-shirts? Comic book t-shirts, right?
Yeah. So, I first got into them probably around the time of either 6th grade or 7th grade, because that's when I got my first one, when my local shop, I think, had them on the wall, and it was like a McFarlane Spider-Man one. And because at that point, the only comic book shirts I saw were for when I was a little kid, and they were kind of either the iron-on ones or the cartoon ones. Uh-huh. So I wanted these shirts so badly. I think I even wore it to the first day of junior high or something along those lines.
I remember those iron-on ones. You'd get them at for me in Florida, it was Zare, or I guess one of those department stores where you pointed out on the wall, right?
There were definitely Star Wars ones like that, and I feel like Kids R Us probably would cycle them in and out at times too.
You're talking about the ones that once you got to direct market, the direct comic market t-shirts from Graffiti? Was that the company, or was it pre that?
No, Graffiti is the company. Graffiti did DC and indie comics around that time. I didn't know who these companies were that were making these shirts when I was a kid. I know now that those shirts were made by either Talking Tops or Comic Images. Uh-huh. At the time, they were just oh, cool, there's a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man tee.
A lot of them had what is that process where it's the dots, where the it's early comics where it's the dots.
The dots in comics I think were I forget what it's called, but in screen printing that would be halftoning it.
Yeah, so I remember having Punisher ones, and I even had one because I remember this. I remember when the shirts started coming out, they would be on the wall, and a lot of the times, well, I guess early on, it wasn't licensed. I remember having a pretty unlicensed looking Punisher one, the skull, but it wasn't the one that came from the comics. But then I remember there would be just random panels printed on some of these shirts where it's it kind of doesn't belong on a shirt,
Those were the early ones. And I don't remember if those are actually made by Comic Images or Talking Tops, because it didn't say their name. It just said, copyright Marvel or whatever. Those were all printed on screen stars. They're next to impossible to fit into if you're a normal sized human being in 2021. I think it was made by one of the companies that are the ones that I'm talking about, just because it seems like it lines up. But they definitely didn't put their own name on it. They were just kind of selling it there. But I know what you mean. They had really random panels that they would show you, like, why would you pick this? This is the strangest thing.
Yeah.
And then they would, what you're talking about is some of them did have the Ben-Day colored process on it where you could kind of see the dots. And I know which Punisher shirt you're talking about. I think it had his old logo from, like, I don't actually even remember if it was Zek who reshaped it, but not the one that we remember from when we were collecting in the late 80s and early 90s.
Right. So how much do those go for now? Have you seen like those shirts on eBay? You mentioned that they, like, no one can fit in them anymore, but are there collectors that keep those in regard?
Those don't go for that much. They used to go for nothing. Now I think if I had to guess, they probably get, depending on what it is, they probably can get anywhere between $70 to $200, depending on what it is. It would most definitely have to be at least an XL, because that's kind of like a smaller large in today. That said, there are double XLs of those, which fit kind of like more modern large XLs that do exist. Again, I don't think that those go for as much because they're not as in demand with the imagery on them as the comic images and talking top shirts. But those would fetch in the lower hundreds and things like that. If one of them happens to turn up, they don't turn up all that often, because I doubt back in the mid to late 80s, they were printing a lot of double XLs.
Right. And it'd probably be hard to find one that's dead stock. And even if it wasn't dead stock, without fruit punch stains.
I have one, and I know of, I think, 2 other people that have double XLs of ones that I've always been like, I'd like to trade or buy for those.
And why screen stars? Like, what's the thing that people love about that? Is it nostalgia, or is it the fit? Is it the fabric?
I don't think anybody loves screen stars. Like, they don't fit that well. Contemporary fit, those are just those shirts. Later screen stars fit better. They are a nice cotton shirt, like the way they age and fade, because they're like a cotton poly mix, so they do feel nice. They're very thin and kind of get a good wear and, I guess, patina, if you can use that for a shirt. But the original ones from the 80s, you can't fit into them unless you're like real thin.
I bet there's some dedicated people out there that like really want it and they squeeze into those, like, because there's probably some super skinny dudes or even women.
There are. I see collectors all the time that I'm like, you could probably fit into a Screen Stars XL, but it's not just the fit. They're shorter, so it's like if you're tall and or even just kind of average height, they're shorter shirts. And like, yeah, some people like to wear a shirt that goes right above like where their pants stop, but I don't. It makes you look weird or boxy depending on what your frame is.
What are the more sought after designs these days? What were the ones that were mass produced? What are kind of the grails of comic tees?
I don't think I could answer that. I don't know what was mass produced. Nobody actually really knows what's out there. And I think the thing, and grail isn't right now, grail just means no one who's collecting has ever seen this shirt become available before. So that's what becomes a grail. As soon as you see something become available, like the next time it comes available, it becomes a little bit less desirable because someone has finally seen it. So for example, a few months back, a Doctor Strange shirt that Joe Madureira drew, probably towards the end of Comic Image's license, it was probably a 1998 shirt or 97. Cool, really cool image. I think the person who bought it paid like $5,000 for it, which is
really,
yeah. Because no one had seen it had never been available before. You don't tend to see that many Doctor Strange shirts. You don't tend to see that many Joe Madureira shirts. Not that I think the people who are collecting it know who the artists are and why they're collecting it. They're more collecting it based on who the character is and if they've seen the shirt before. But yeah, that's the most recent one that I could point to. But not commonly, I shouldn't say that, but I kind of got out of it when you can't purchase a thing that you want because it's going to cost you anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000. I'm not paying $1,000 to $2,000 for a t-shirt. So at this point, if I want something, I'd have to trade for it.
What's the most that you'll pay or have paid for it?
I think a few hundred, and I think that's when I kind of was like, I'm done. I'm not paying this much for a shirt. And like, and in those cases, it has to have been something I absolutely wanted or desired for a really long time. But it's been a long time since I paid for a shirt. I've amassed enough prior to it kind of blowing up that I could like use shirts that I had as currency, even if it meant trading 2 or 3 for one to get something that I wanted in particular.
Tell me when you first started collecting.
Probably in the early aughts, like officially collecting, like I don't know, anywhere between 03 and 05.
What kicked up your desire for those? I mean, you were heavily involved in streetwear. You had your own company, MISHKA NYC at the time. So was it just like you were just bored with streetwear and you wanted to get into vintage?
No. I mean, I just started streetwear, so I was definitely bored with it and it was just kicking off. No, I think we were at a comic book convention. I think with like the New York Comic Con, or the one that happened at Penn Station before they brought over the New York comic convention. And there was just a dealer who had a fucking box full of dead stock shirts that he wanted like a couple bucks for per shirt, and they were awesome, and we just grabbed all of them. There was probably, I don't want to overstate it, I feel like there were definitely at least 20 shirts in there, but it might have been as many as 30.
Wow. Do you remember which ones there were?
Yeah, and we like divvied them up. I'm wearing one of the ones that we got from that. It's like all it's like I used to wear it to the gym. It's also faded, broken apart and faded. But I think the ones that I took from it that I remember was a John Romita Jr. Bishop one. There was a Liefeld Cable one. There was a McFarlane Hulk one, which was a Screen Stars, which never fit right. I remember Greg, I think, took 1 or 2 of the mega prints, which were the first things that were really in demand when people started collecting them recently. They're the all over print shirts.
Yes.
I never liked, and I never collected just because I think they look cool like as a thing, but like I could never wear them. I always felt like a little bit like a toddler in one of those.
Those are very hard to pull off.
Some people could pull them off. I'm not those people.
Yeah. Have you sold any of those that you got at the time?
I had one mega print shirt, and I don't remember if I got it at that time or shortly after. It was a cool Hulk one. It was a Keown one, and it was a wearable one. I would occasionally wear it where most of the print was just kind of like crackle, and then it just had Hulk, his logo, and him on it, front and back. I eventually traded it for I think I traded it and another Morbius shirt, a black Morbius shirt, for this one in particular that I'd never seen before that I very much wanted. I think it was the cover of the first Morbius solo issue from the 90s that I just absolutely, it was like one of my favorite covers, and it's a sick image.
Why comic book t-shirts?
I mean, I've been into comic books my whole life. Well, not my whole life, most of my life, or at least since I could read. And again, also into fashion and streetwear. This is the combination of both worlds put together. And again, why? Because when I was first discovering it, nobody cared about this stuff. You could find these shirts for a few bucks on eBay. You could still probably find them at comic book shops, and like the back corners getting all dusty. And it was just like a cool thing. And it was a way for you to wear them, to wear your passion outdoors, and not without having the comic book. And at that point, I wasn't collecting comics anymore. It had been a long while, and I think at various points I probably wasn't even reading comics, because I would go through periods where I kept up with it and then I didn't.
Would you wear ones that didn't necessarily have characters that you read about?
Yeah, because I collected not based on the character. I collected based on who the artist was, or like what it looked like. I mean, and I truthfully, I read comics on and off, but in a steady clip for most of my life. So none of these characters were like, I didn't know who they were, but I mainly collected for like who the artist was that drew them.
Yeah. I imagine there might be more of a desire for the artist than there is for what's the shirt, right?
No, I mean, maybe in the way me and you think about it because of like the time that we came from, but you got to imagine some of the people who are collecting it now, they're either young millennials or early Gen Zers. Like for them, their first brush with the Marvel universe is through the movies, which are detached from the artist. So this is nostalgia for a time that either when they were really small kids or they weren't even alive yet. And they're mostly drawn to the characters. I don't think a lot of them know know or cared who the artists were when they first got into it. I'm sure as with everything, as their passion grew for it, they would start researching and getting into the artists and learning about them. But I don't think that was they cared about or what drew them to the characters. It wasn't the artist.
Yeah, you're seeing more and more people where they're into the MCU, but they don't read the comics. I was at Starbucks the other day, and there was this nice young lady, and she was wearing a Marvel Comics face mask. And we got into conversation, and I asked if she read comics, and she kind of shied away from that. But you see that more and more, people that are just into the movies, and it's totally cool. Like whatever gets you into it, into that universe is cool, if you ask me. So I get that. And I understand what you're saying about a nostalgia for a time that either they didn't really experience, or maybe it's from their older siblings or even their parents.
Right. It's no different than when we were in the 90s, and like if we wanted to get a Joy Division or a Bauhaus shirt, we never saw these bands. We barely, they were just kind of cool bands from a period in time that we didn't experience, that clearly had an impact on the time that we're living through now, through the music that we're not living through now, living through then, through the music that we were into, and we were drawn to them, but we didn't actually have any firsthand experience with a lot of those bands.
Totally. And it's like, even a sidestep of that, with the 80s, it was like 50s worship. So you saw like a lot of Elvis stuff, or like James Dean stuff, or Marilyn stuff, like on t-shirts. And people totally wore that stuff.
You saw that in the 90s too.
Yeah. You mentioned you trade, and you mentioned, I don't know in this conversation, but you've told me that you've sold stuff on eBay before. I even think that I've sent you a link before of a shirt that I saw, and you said I'm the seller of that shirt, right?
Yeah, you have. I have. I occasionally put stuff on eBay. It's not like it depends on when I need to clean or want to clean out my closet, when I just kind of look through stuff and I'm like, really haven't worn this in a while. I don't think I'm going to. It either doesn't fit right, or for whatever reason, let me just get rid of it, because I think it probably, either I just want to get rid of it, or I know that like I can probably get a good market value for it right now at this point in time. I moved a bunch of shirts, I think about a month or so back, maybe like 10 to 15 comic book shirts, but mostly if I'm trading stuff or doing that, I do it via Instagram, via like the small community that exists.
Yeah, let's get into that. Who's in this small community?
It's mostly people that are into vintage, who decided that like this is going to be their particular niche or lane in vintage, and like I respect that. As people get into stuff, they want to like hone in on one particular thing, and there's some people in this who not only just hone in on comic book tees, they may hone in on one character in particular that they're hunting out.
Is there a hot character?
I think it just depends on who the person is. It's funny that you say the hot character thing. Is like, I've definitely seen a bunch of cool Wolverine shirts come up, and they're not that desirable because to them Wolverine is such a common character for stuff. But yeah, I've never seen certain ones of these, and to me, growing up in the 80s and 90s, Wolverine is everything, and like some of these like Silvestri, Jim Lee Wolverines and things like that. So I'm like naturally drawn to them, and you can get, they're not as in demand because Wolverine is viewed as a much more common character than say Doctor Strange. But to me, like, I don't read Doctor Strange. I never had this personal attachment to Doctor Strange.
What is it like dealing with the community?
I think for the most part, they're good people. They're good. I think like the core community are good kids. I think a few of them are probably around my age, but I think they're into it because they got into it through vintage clothing. They unfortunately, by getting into it, they drove up the price for something that at a point in time, I think maybe going back to 2000 and let's see, anywhere probably in 2015, you could probably still get these shirts, sometimes dead stock, for anywhere between $10 to $30 a shirt. And then it slowly started. I think one vendor in particular, Wax and Threads, who's a great vintage vendor, he bought out another overseas vendor who had a bunch of dead stock shirts, who I know because I would actually sometimes buy from this vendor and I'd see him sell the shirts. So he took a calculated risk and gamble, and he bought this guy he bought out this guy's entire inventory, and I think he had him actually hunt out more stuff that he didn't have listed for sale, and he brought it to the US. And I distinctly remember this is when everything changed, is once he got a hold of that inventory, these shirts, which at that point in time, I think from this vendor, if you were getting them, you could get them for between $30 to $40 plus shipping. Once he brought them in the US, he doubled the price to $80, which today would be incredible, especially looking back at, I remember what he had for sale. But I remember at the time he did it, it was like, oh my God, this is outrageous. How could you be charging $80 for these shirts? This is like, you've lost your mind, like this, that, and the other. But he's a longtime vintage dealer, and he was taking a calculated risk, being like, hey, this guy has a bunch of these. I have a feeling that these are going to appreciate in value. I don't think he ever realized how much they would appreciate in value in the short time. So he brought them over for, I think he was charging anywhere between $79.99 to $100 for a handful of them.
Were they all Marvel, or were they more like some of the Dark Horse stuff? Was it just like
they were mostly Marvel? There might have been some other ones kind of peppered in there, but they're definitely mostly Marvel. And he had a bunch of mega print shirts, and he had them up for a while at like probably a good year where they were this price. And then what inevitably happened is other vintage dealers started picking off from him and sitting on them. And then of course, things that were suddenly $30 that now were edging closer to $100. These guys, once they picked off from him and they started amassing their own collections and then getting them from other sources, wherever they were getting them, they would then double the price. And this is like then when you started seeing these shirts go from $30 to $75 to $150 to $200 and so forth. And, more people started taking interest in them. I think partially because they started trading for more and more money, but also just because the MCU started getting more popular and more people's heads. So people were looking for like, oh, what's cool stuff that I can kind of align or attach myself with in the vintage community that's around this. And they would, fall into this not topic, but category.
You think it's here to stay, or you think it's a fad, or?
What are you talking about? Vintage clothing or
no, this particular niche of comic book T-shirts.
I don't think that it's conceivable that they'll stay at these prices.
What do you think has driven them up? One,
it's flossing, to being able to say that you own something that nobody else has seen, and knowing that there's some clout that goes with it. I think that's a big factor. Coupled with, when you see something that you never seen before, so you apply this false sense of value to what it may be worth. And, that helps drive the price up. There's also a sense of cool cachet that's gone into these shirts now. I'm pretty sure A$AP Rocky has worn one in some press photo, or at least some paparazzi shot, and maybe Drake or Bad Bunny or anybody of those that higher echelon. So there becomes an increased value into this, because now it's a cool guy brand, even though it's not a brand, it's a thing. But I remember there was a point in 2019, I think it was the fall of 2019, I tracked down this guy, Alan, who used to, who ran Comic Images.
Oh, wow.
I tracked him down on LinkedIn, and I was like, hey, I know this sounds like a random question. Do you happen to know if you got do you have like a box or an old storage unit that you got sitting with these old shirts?
Very crafty of you.
He was like, no, I don't have anything left over from the runs or anything like that. But we got to talking and got friendly, and there was a point in time where I was like, hey, he saw my background, and he's like, he saw, and I was like, yeah, the prices of these are skyrocketing. And we got to talking about like, well, let's resurrect these. And I mean, I'm sure I can get someone like Urban Outfitters interested in carrying the lines. And he's like, yeah, let me reach back out and see if I can get my contacts at Marvel with licensing to see if they'll give it back to me, especially if we're just retroing older stuff. And I was like, yeah, let's look into it. We ran into a few problems. It's like, I think at that point, I really wanted to do it with the mega prints, because those were super popular. And more of a thing to do. The problem was that at that point in time, all over print T-shirts were not that popular. So no printer had belt printers or was really able to handle doing all over print shirts anymore, or the ones that went out of business. So tracking down a printer who could do that became a problem. And then kind of as we were researching it and doing it, I got my current job at Complex, which complicated my ability to kind of devote time to doing this, to researching it. And then of course the 2020 pandemic happened, which I was kind of like, well, I'm glad I didn't go full steam in investing into this, because if we did with Urban Outfitters, they could have at any point been like, nah, we're not taking them.
Prices must have gone up during the pandemic, huh? Have you seen a spike for that?
Yeah, that's when I saw the $5,000 t-shirt. I think at that point during the start of the pandemic, you know, it wasn't that uncommon that you would see something trading for $750 to $1,000, but then to see stuff go to $1,500, $2,500, suddenly 5,000, like, you know, that was just crazy.
I guess a broader thing that this is making me think about is, you know, people say with t-shirts, they don't really think that it's a collection, but because you wear them all the time, but it's a real thing. Like more people than they think might be, even they might be collecting t-shirts and not even know it. Like, you know, the souvenir t-shirts, stuff from concerts. Why do you think the t-shirt is such a desirable or popular type of collectible?
I think it's because it's an immediate signifier of what you're into, even though obviously it doesn't necessarily mean anything because anybody could wear a t-shirt. But I think to some people, that's what it means. You can announce your passions to the rest of the world. I don't know how it works for us, you know, someone who's, you know, a teenager now or in their 20s, but like when we were growing up, if you wore a particular band t-shirt, you were announcing to other like-minded people, hey, I'm into this. That probably means that we share common interests. I don't know if that's really true anymore, because I don't think kids these days are look to music as like a symbol of what their identity is, the way that we may have. I think a lot of kids these days look to their you know, how they see what their gender is as more of a symbol of who their identity is than what band they're into.
Yeah. And what do you think it is about illustration, specifically like people on t-shirts? Forget like comic books, even like with bands or just streetwear or just any t-shirt, it's either like a skull or like a person or like a drawing of a person. Why do you think people like to wear people on their t-shirts?
I couldn't answer that. I don't know if
Have you ever thought about that? I mean, you made t-shirts yourself.
I mean, it's just the graphic medium. I think people are drawn to a figure on a shirt, whether it's human or a comic book character.
There's just so many times where I've like looked at a shirt and I'm like, oh, I love that. And then I kind of pulled back a little bit. It's like, oh, do I need another face on my shirt? Like I have so many shirts with faces or someone drawn.
I think a face on a shirt is a very striking and dramatic composition. So that's why people are drawn to it, because they're like, oh, it's going to draw attention to myself.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's why people buy. Well, some people are drawn to certain clothing because it's a statement piece, and like that's an easy way to make a statement, is to wear a shirt with a giant old man's face on it, like the old Metallica Unforgiven shirt.
Great shirt.
Yeah. Do
you have that shirt?
No, I think I actually just sold the only. No, I have another one, but I just sold the only Metallica shirt that I had.
Do you collect shirts otherwise, or is your focus only on comic book t-shirts?
No, I collect shirts otherwise. I collect a lot of band tees, which are a lot easier to get for decent prices now, especially more niche stuff, even though it's harder to track down. But like that's not where the attention is currently.
Would you ever be caught dead with a Target Marvel Comics t-shirt, like the Infinity War or anything like that? Why?
Never.
Why?
For one, I don't want to sound pompous or anything like that, but it's like, it just feels like it's not the same thing. The printing is completely different, and like that's one thing that draws me to it. Now I get it. I have experience, so it's inside baseball for me to see how screen printing is done and how the color seps pop. And to most people, they don't notice the difference, but I do.
Uh-huh.
So I see that immediately. I can't stand the fake vintage wear. Like I can spot when something's not really vintage, like immediately, and I can't stand it. I can spot it on someone else. I can spot it on a shirt. It just bothers me. I don't think they don't fit the same. Like modern shirts, whether they're meant to look vintage or not, they don't fit the same. Contemporary shirts don't use the same quality of cotton. They're not cut exactly the same. It's just different. And it's like, you know, part of the thing is we wear what we wear, not just because we like what's on it. We wear what we wear because we like the way we feel in it because of how it makes us look. And so like how the cut of something is.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Do you get props from dudes who are in the Target distressed X-Men shirt?
I've never gotten that at all. Or at least not that I can recall doing it or remember it. Maybe I haven't. I just don't remember it. I do distinctly remember that there was a point in time when I was collecting it before it blew up. I would occasionally wear one out. And I'd always ask my wife, like, I don't look like, do you think I look like a comic book dork who one of those in one of these shirts, or is it distinct that like this is a very different lane? And like, you know, her answer was like, no, it's you could tell the difference. I don't know if she was just placating me or not, but I remember this always running in the back of my head to be like, I just wanted to be clear that this like I'm not like, it doesn't look like I went to Target or wherever there's, or even going to a comic book store now and getting a contemporary shirt, that this was clearly a more curated selection of
you're this type of nerd, not this type of nerd.
Right. I wanted to be a very particular type of nerd and not this type of nerd.
No, I totally get it. So has anyone ever approached you in the same way that people will, I don't even know if this happens anymore, but people will approach a person wearing a band t-shirt to kind of call out their street cred or see if they're a poser or not? Do you find anybody who comes up to you and asks you if you read Bishop? Not like Bishop has his own series, but do you know, whatever, Daredevil, whatever you're wearing, do you have people asking you if you read those comics?
No one's ever tried to check my cred on any of those. I'm not afraid of that if that does happen, because I can clearly back it up. I told you the most recent one was at like the fancy liquor store that I went to, where the guy at the counter struck up a conversation with me. I forget which shirt I was wearing, and then we got to talking about. He told me that the Max, was one of his favorite books, and reading the Max, and I was just like, God.
Would you wear a Max T-shirt?
I've had two Max T-shirts. I still have one. I had one with like the classic cover from #1, which never did exactly the way I wanted to. I think also the print was a little off center, and that drives me crazy. And
a lot of those are. A lot of those like old.
A lot of them are, but this one in particular, even if they are, this one you could notice it because it had a frame around it. So once it has a frame around it, you can kind of tell when something's off center. And like I just picked up it. It drove me crazy. I have one left that's like it must have been a one shot where they did Max versus Hit. So I have that one left. I don't think I've worn that shirt in years. But even though now that we've reread the book and it was awful, I would still wear a Max T-shirt because it's more than the book. It represents a particular time in my life and nostalgia around it. And I also love Sam Keith. I think he's an incredible artist.
Great artist. And good for a T-shirt.
Yeah. And so I would wear it for that sense. And even the book was so bad, going back to it, realizing it was so bad, it's almost fun to wear it because of it's just like a talking point. If someone brings it up and being like, I bet you probably don't realize how terrible this book is.
For people listening, it's we went through, Mike and I are in a comic book club with a bunch of other homies, and we just reread the Max as adults, and to put it mildly, it didn't really hold up for us. But we love Sam Keith. That's kind of what got us in there.
Yeah. And I have a couple of other Sam Keith shirts, and I've had some that have come and gone for various points in my collecting. But like, he's always been a very a major favorite artist of mine. And there's one Sam Keith Wolverine shirt that I would absolutely kill to get, but it would just be ridiculous money.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it a few times. It's a white shirt, and white shirts are usually my favorite because the colors pop more on them, and the print doesn't crack and fade. And in some shirts, like this one, this particular black shirt faded beautifully, the way it cracked it and whatever. But some shirts you get like these these hard breaks and it just doesn't look that good.
Yeah.
So I tend to try to steer clear of black shirts.
Will you send me pictures of that? Because part of this, I'm gonna have an Instagram of certain pieces of people's collection that I talk to. So will you send me like a pic of that, and you could be wearing it or whatever? Can you just send me pictures of some of the shirts that you're doing?
Now. Yeah, I can send you a picture of that.
Great.
But the Sam Keith shirt that I'm talking about in particular, I have one that's on black that also magically developed a good fade on it. But the one I'm talking about in particular was a white shirt. It's a picture of Wolverine kind of like with his foot forward, stepping forward with his claws out. But the thing that really drew me to it, it's a big print. And it's one of his Marvel Comics Presents covers where Wolverine's costume is all torn up. And I don't know if you remember the way Sam Keith would draw costumes when they're torn up, and they would have all like
tattered.
But they would be draped all over him, and they would be turned into these beautiful spiral. It was just like, it's like, to me as like a kid, when I would try to redraw it, like I would always like gravitate to like redrawing like the way he would draw messed up uniforms, and that is something that I absolutely also am drawn to in comic book tees, is if it's a shirt of a character where they're battle damaged or their uniform is just worn the fuck up. Like one of my favorite tees that I eventually had to replace because it got so worn that it got a hole in the collar that made it unwearable for me was I think it's the cover to McFarlane's Spider-Man 4 or 5, I forget which one. It's the one where Spider-Man's coming out where he gets
where the building collapsed over him.
The building collapses over him.
Yeah,
he's coming
that's
out,
cool.
all torn up, and it's got his mouth, part of his mouth torn up. I used to draw that cover redraw it all the time.
Very striking.
Yeah, and the way that McFarlane draws like the tufts of hair coming through the holes that are created, it was just like is burned in my mind. So it's like I had to have this T-shirt, and when that one fell apart, I had to track down another one of it.
Is that like a variant type of thing, that a variant aesthetic that you would rather have than like the normal image that is just maybe like a cover of something or like the standard appearance of a hero?
Well, this is the cover of something. I don't think I'm drawn to a variant of something. I think it's just if I'm just drawn to how the particular image looks and how striking it is. I think if there was one thing that I would definitely niche within a niche that I would collect, it would be shirts with characters with their uniforms torn up. But I don't think that there's all that many of those out there in existence. So it would be a difficult, I think it would be a difficult collection to complete. But it would be an easy one in terms of how many different things I'd have to find to complete it.
Right. Now, did you ever consider that you were collecting, or were you just buying these to wear?
No, I was definitely collecting.
You consider it from the jump. You were like, this is like I want to amass a bunch of these.
I don't know if I wanted to amass a bunch of these or eventually just that's what started happening. But anything that you're buying that is no longer readily available, where you can just walk into a store and get it, like say sneakers that you have to track down via a site like eBay. Yeah. And you're getting more than one of it, you're collecting it.
Right. Is there anything you're looking for now?
I have a wish list, but I haven't, like I'd love to get some Dale Keown Hulks. But again, Marvel shirts are ridiculously expensive. So I don't think I'll be able to get it unless I'm going to trade for it. And then I'd have, it would be like trading an Infinity Stone for an Infinity Stone. I'd have to be giving up something else that I value a lot to get this shirt. And I have to make that decision. Let's hear
your wish list just for shits and giggles.
God, Adam, I seriously, I'd have to like pull it up. Like the first thing that jumps off to my head, or the first two things, is like there's a Dale Keown Hulk cover that is, I forget if it has both green and gray Hulk on it. He's like kind of tearing the head apart, and like a banner is in there somewhere, and I forget which Hulk number issue it is, but that's a big one on my list. There's a Age of Apocalypse shirt that has Apocalypse on it with like up here, like in like his big head, that's drawn by Joe Madureira, and it also has a back print, which is rare, and the back print is just it's the Age of Apocalypse logo, which is so late 90s comic. It's incredible. That's one that I would love to get. God, I'm trying to think. There's probably also ones I've never seen before, that I'm sure I've never seen before. Like you'd have to go through the old previews, diamond previews catalogs to see what they were soliciting. And I'm not even sure if all those shirts that they were soliciting ever got made necessarily, because that's the way solicitations work. If there's not enough orders for them, you don't necessarily print them.
I've seen, I've been flipping through some of my old comics, and you see those solicitations, and some of the shirts that they have, I mean, boy, those would probably go for buku right now.
Yeah, but I also never know if they got made until you actually see one out in the wild. It's like difficult to say. So sometimes like the collectors will post it, like I'm looking for this one, and I'm like, I've never seen that one. I'm not 100% certain that it ever got made, but maybe it did, and I just didn't see it, because like, you know, these things were not sold to stores; they were only sold to comic books. You
had to mail in and hope that you had to send a check or money order and then hope it arrived, right?
Those are different. Those are the ones that they had in the back of the comic books. Like the diamond previews ones were like, I think you could buy them. Those were comic book shops who were ordering them to stock as inventory wholesale buys.
What's the furthest that you're going to go these days to get one? Or are you just trading?
Just trading. I mean, the only shirts that I'm buying at this point are like indie comic shirts, which you can get fairly pretty good prices, because I think a lot of the young collectors, they don't know these books, or they're not reading them, so they're not in that high in demand. And like I like those books. They're affordable, can keep collecting the hobby, keep me in the hobby by just giving me a different lane. I'm sure eventually that will that will get ruined in some sense.
Yeah.
But stuff like that. But also the problem is with a lot of the indie books that I want to collect, they're printed on Stedman Haynes shirts. And the problem is that some of the Stedman Haynes shirts fit nice, but some of them don't. They're a little too short, so you never know exactly what you're getting. Like say I have a Gru shirt that fits exactly like how I want it to fit, but then I also have a Concrete shirt that I like a lot, but I think it's a little too short.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you going to keep it, or are you going to trade it?
I don't know. Right now it's like in a storage bin. I'll have to decide for it. And I actually don't remember if it's too short. I may need to, dust it out and decide, put it on and see how it is. But I definitely, like, for example, I have a particular Grendel shirt that I absolutely love, that looks like the way the colors are on it and the way the composition of it, and just Grendel in general in this shirt. It looks like a late 80s German metal, a thrash metal. But it definitely, I think, is a little too short. But like I've had this shirt a few times in my life. I have trouble getting rid of it, just because like the graphic and the way the colors were printed on it are so striking.
Yeah. Does your wife Kate wear any of these that are too short for you?
I definitely buy vintage shirts and I give it to her. She has no interest in wearing comic book shirts. I've definitely seen shirts that are size small that she could wear that I wanted to get that I couldn't get for myself. Like I remember a particular McFarlane Hulk. I think it's the one where the cover where he's like squeezing the Hulk text in and it's like crumbling.
Yeah.
And a red shirt, and I'm like, I'm gonna get it for her. She's not gonna wear it. She doesn't give a fuck about the Hulk. So if I get vintage shirts for her that I can't wear myself, or that I see in a size small, they're usually band tees, not necessarily comic tees. Maybe occasionally a movie tee. I don't remember if I've ever gotten her a comic shirt. I think once a seller had an 80s Swamp Thing shirt, and I know she would wear a Swamp Thing shirt because she likes this one. She read that and she loved that book. Yeah. And this is, I think, not from the comic book. I think it was more when the movie was coming. The movie
I saw a movie as a kid. I wouldn't be.
They were repurposing the comic book art for it, and I think at the time the seller wanted like $80 for it, which is still a lot for a lower tier comic character in the terms of what people are collecting. For size small. Like size smalls are difficult to sell because so few people can fit in them unless you're a girl, and I don't think a lot of girls are hunting out comic book nerdy 80s comic book tees. Not that there aren't girls into comics. I was
going to ask this. Have you seen any females in vintage comic tees? Or dealt with them online?
Not personally. The community, as far as I can tell, is mostly male. I mean, there's definitely women into vintage, and there's a lot of women into vintage. I just don't know if they're into comic book tees per se.
Yeah.
And they're definitely they might be into band tees. I definitely see that crossover. But again, the sizing is so different. I'm not looking for size small tees, so I don't interact with them that much.
Right.
I usually there was a point in time where I would buy something in a size large and just kind of deal with it. But like at this point, like it has to be an XL because I don't know how it's going to fit when it comes in because measurements are so weird. And, when you wash something, depending on how it shrinks up and it'll keep shrinking up over time, it doesn't make any sense to buy anything unless it's an XL, even if it shows up and I find it a little too big.
Yeah. And this is a cool space because, it's one of the rare things that you can collect and you can actually use, and it's almost cooler the older and more worn out that it is.
I love band tees when they're worn out. That's definitely something I absolutely love. I don't like it as much as comic tees, even though I'm wearing this one right now that's very worn out. There is someone who is another very old head collector who I think only a few years ago realized that there was a community and he was kind of collecting privately, and then suddenly he kind of showed up on Instagram like, holy shit, I didn't realize there were other people collecting.
That's great.
He's very much into worn out, really destroyed shirts with like holes and like stuff, and like he just like absolutely like loves them, and I understand why he loves them, but for whatever reason I don't like them in the comic book tees, and I think it's because for me, a worn out band tee has like some sort of feeling of like this weight of the band, but in a comic tee, it's like I'm collecting it because I love the artist, so I want his work to kind of shine, and I want those colors to pop more because that's what I'm drawn to it. But he obviously collects it for a different reason, and I've definitely traded with him where I've had shirts that I absolutely love that are difficult to find, but that they've been worn to death, and he's had other shirts that he either has multiples of, or in a different, in an XL, and he has a large and he can fit into different sizes, where he'd rather have the more worn out shirt. Sometimes I've traded him one for one. Here's the worn out version for the one that you have that's either dead stock or barely worn, because he would rather have the worn out version of it. And I've definitely traded with him a bunch. He traded me something very recently that I didn't even know existed until he showed it to me, that I had to have because it was one of the first books that I bought with my own money from the newsstand as a kid. It was a Talking Tops, not a comic image. And just to do the differential, there were two companies selling shirts to comic book stores in the late 80s and early 90s. There was Comic Images and there were Talking Tops. They were both from Jersey, not that far from each other. I don't know if they were related in any way. I never asked Alan that, or if I did, I think he said that they weren't. And I don't know how Marvel allowed both of them to hold the license at the same time, but they were both out there. Talking Top seems to have stopped making Marvel shirts around 90 or maybe 91, but there was definitely overlap in the late 80s between the two. And the print style and the what they were doing, they put out different shirts, and even if I think there's a few instances where they have the same graphic on a shirt as the other one, but they would treat it differently a little bit, so you could tell the difference. Like I know that there's like one of them put out a particular silver surfer shirt with certain artwork on a black shirt with kind of with the space effects on it in black, and he's kind of just floating there, while there I think is a Talking Tops or Comics Images version of it on a white shirt with surfer coming out of like an inverted triangle that's containing the space, and like it has the logo and things like that, and the other one doesn't.
I'm going for inverted triangle.
I do like that one more, mainly because it's a white shirt, but there's some instances of that. But there's two companies that were kind of mainly dealing with selling shirts to comic book stores that I'm mostly looking for. Most of them are Comic Images, but there's a few Talking Tops shirts. Talking Tops did a lot of like cover repro shirts and things like that. They also were a screen printer. I did my research to find out that they were an actual screen printer that printed stuff for other people, but they also would take in licenses and then print shirts and sell them. Their biggest claim to fame is that eventually, I think after the comic book thing is, do you remember those shirts that were like Datasaurus? Of course. Or Chefosaurus. Do you remember like those shirts where it have the picture of the cartoon image of the dinosaur and the description of what it was? They created those. That's their own IP.
Those like at the mall novelty shop.
Yeah, that was their own IP, and that was huge for them. And wow. I think when they did that, they didn't were like, well, we don't need to pay Marvel for licensing their shirts when these things are fucking blowing up, and we're probably printing hundreds of thousands of them, and we're also the printer, so we're controlling what it costs us to make them.
Why do you think these companies don't come back?
I don't remember. I remember when in MISHKA, and I remember for our 10th anniversary, I wanted to what I wanted to do is like the big thing that we did for a 10th anniversary, that I wanted to do an X-Men capsule because, you know, the X, like that's what I want.
Right.
10th anniversary. That would be my dream come true. And we reached out, and Marvel was like, yeah, if you want to do it, we can do it. But there was a, oh my God, I forgot what the term is called now. They would do the license, and they had a high percent license that you would give to them, which was fine. But I think that the issue was that there was a guaranteed minimum. It didn't matter what we sold; we had to guarantee that we would give them. I don't remember what it was, if it was $5,000 or $20,000, but whatever it was, the guarantee that we'd have to give to them, we weren't sure that we could make that from what we were selling to then be on the hook for, that it was just too much of a burden to take on. I also didn't realize that when this was happening, had we done this, they were also doing a deal with Stussy at the exact same time, and this would have come out at the same time as Stussy's, so it wouldn't have been as unique, even though it would have been a bit different, because clearly I only wanted to do X-Men because of the X.
What did Stussy do? I forget.
They took a lot of like just like kind of generic, like some stuff was Kirby, some stuff was Romita, some stuff was 90s kind of like poses of like, you know, of iconic characters. I think there was a Black Panther, there was a Doc Ock one, and then they would like, you know, put the Stussy logo with them, which I wouldn't have done because it looked weird to me. Like, you know, I remember there's like a Doc Ock one where he's like, you know, he's punching forward and his Ock thing is coming out, and there's like a Stussy logo that he's breaking through off to the side, or like something along those lines. Like, it was cool. It's a cool graphic, but I would never wear it.
Yeah. What are some of the don'ts with comic book t-shirts that you see people doing? Do you see any trends of, like you mentioned how Wolverine isn't as desirable, but it was more for us? Like, do you see like any character that the kind of new school collector is into on a shirt?
The biggest trend that I'm seeing is a bunch of, I think some of them are the collectors and some of them are just people kind of being, looking at what's going on and trying to be advantageous. Is there's a lot of people making contemporary bootlegs. They're not reprinting stuff that's existed. They're making their own versions to look like the comic images and talking top shirts. A lot of them are very well done. They're, you know, especially I've watched them progress over time, where they started where it's kind of like, oh, you're not getting the color separations right, to now where I'm like, oh, you've gotten the color separate. You found someone who could properly do it, or you figured out how these need to be done. And they're putting their shirts out that way, and they look very good. Again, I'm not drawn to them because to me, like, I want the artifact from my youth, not something that's referencing my youth. So like, I don't, you know, if someone gifted one to me, I'd hold on to it, but it just wouldn't have the same draw to me. But I definitely see some cool ones. Like I saw someone do a great Mystique one recently, and I was like, if that one existed, and Mystique is definitely a character where if she pops up, people get crazed over, because she doesn't pop up all that often. There's like a few shirts that are solo shirts with her. Yeah. Any female character actually gets the community excited. Again, there's less solo shirts with the female characters.
When we're able to go back out and when comic book conventions pop up again, do you think we're going to see some of these vintage comic book shirt dealers having booths?
At the comic book conventions? No, because that's not their market. The people going to the comic book conventions, they're not going to pay these prices for these shirts. To them, to a comic book nerd who's kind of there to buying action figures or video games or comic books, like they're going to go to the booth of what's that company that kind of is it Junk Food, who usually has a booth at these comic book conventions, you know, and they sell like shirts that look, you know, like with the 90s and things like that are pre-worn. They're going to go get one of those. They're not going to be like, why would I pay $200, $500, $2,000 for this shirt from the 90s and I can go to this Junk Food booth and buy one for $30? They probably would complain if the shirt is $30. Like, you know, you've seen that, like, you know, $30 t-shirt should be like $15 or $20.
Yeah.
Or they can go to Target or Walmart, who probably has a license the same way they do with AC/DC shirts and things like that they probably sell for $12.
Yeah. Would you ever buy, or do you ever buy like the new shirts? Because thinking down the road 20 years that they're going to be vintage? Have you thought like that yet? Or is it just the design is different now?
I've definitely had that thought, but it would have to be something that I'm drawn to as a book that I feel passionate about, it would have to be, I don't like comic shirts that are printed with in processed colors where there's like the heavy gradients and things like that, where they try to reproduce what the actual color is. I like separations that break apart colors into blocks or halftones to kind of recreate different colors. So like there's a particular process that I like. And I don't see that many contemporary character shirts that I don't know. I'm also not looking. I have started, I think what I have done, and I may continue to do, not that I have very many of them, is shop shirts for comic book shops.
Oh.
Like I had my eye on one, and he sells it for dirt cheap. I don't know why I didn't buy it. Oh, I remember why I didn't buy it is because the white one was sold out, and they had a blue one. Is Desert Island, which is like the big, or my favorite indie shop in Brooklyn or New York in general. And like, he had a great shop shirt with a camel. And I don't remember which artist he got to illustrate it. I should ask him next time I see him. Beautiful shirt. And like, it was just a white shirt with one color blue print. Yeah. Just like a beautiful shirt.
My friend actually has a comic book shop in Olympia, Washington called Danger Room Comics. And he solicits, he doesn't, I don't think solicits is the right term. He contracts, renowned artists for his shop shirts. He did a Mike Allred shirt that I have with Madman, and he just did his last one that he just gave to me was the artist who did My Favorite Thing Is Monsters, that wonderful she's a woman, let me see, what's her name? I have it right here on my bedside. What is her name?
I like the Desert Island shirt because I like that when a comic book shop doesn't need to put the word comics in the name. It's like an in the know thing. Like, I know what this is.
Okay.
When it says comics in it, it feels a little, it starts veering a little bit more into the nerdy territory. But that said, there is one particular shirt, and I haven't seen it, or I think they still reprint it, but I would like one from the 90s. Is Forbidden Planet had an incredible shop shirt. I think they still reprint it. They have this very
the old man, like he's like an old man.
Yeah. Like the different characters, they look like they're from an RPG game or something like that they created. I love a vintage one of those, and they still reprint those. I'm pretty sure they've used that art. But I remember those shirts from when I was, a teenager, and like they're very striking, and I would love an original one of them. And that something called Forbidden Planet, probably some sort of fucking nerdy shop. It doesn't need the word comics in it.
Dude, I saw someone wearing that shirt, and I actually stopped them to comment on it.
That artwork was very striking.
Fantastic. Do you know who did that?
I feel like I did at one point. I don't remember. Part of me wants to think that it was Brian Boland. I don't think it was. But I'm sure it's out there, and I'm positive I looked it up at one point.
So good.
I don't remember it.
My favorite thing is Monsters. Emil Ferris. Excuse me.
I'd love Fanographic shirts if you could find some, especially Daniel Clowes ones. Like, I have one Ghost World shirt. I have another Daniel Clowes shirt, which is a shirt that he did for Urge Overkill. But I also love Urge Overkill as a band, in addition to loving Daniel Clowes.
Yeah, there you go. You doubled up.
Yeah.
How much did you pay for those, if you don't mind me asking? How much were those? How much are Clowes shirts?
It depends. I think some vendors probably charge a lot because they know who Daniel Clowes is and he carries his name, but I don't think there's a lot of demand for them. I don't think I exceeded, maybe the Ghost World shirt was like $60, maybe $70, and the Urge Overkill shirt was probably around the same. Again, they're not a band that people are like, they're not a hyped vintage 90s band. I love them, and I knew that this shirt existed because he did the interior album or the back cover art for a Supersonic Storybook, and I knew I seen it before, and I didn't get it because I think at that time it was an XL, and I thought it would be too big, and it came in a somebody was selling a lot of 3 Urge Overkill shirts for like $40 at the time, and I didn't get it because that one was an XL, even though I wanted it, and then eventually had to pay way more for it to track down than what it would have been when I finally realized I probably should have gotten an XL, because a large would have shrunk up and not fit after a few washes. It wasn't crazily expensive because they're not a band people are checking for, and I don't even remember if the vendor knew that it was Daniel Clowes who drew it. But so like Fanographic stuff, I'd love to find more shirts of from their books, particularly Daniel Clowes ones. Oh my god, his name just jumped out of my head, the guy who did Hate.
Bag?
Yeah, Peter Badge. I'd love to find some great Jeff Smith Bone shirts. I've seen a few that are okay, but I've never seen like one that's like you know, I'm like, oh my God, I have to have this shirt, especially when if it had the rat creatures on it from when he was actually publishing the book and not a contemporary graffiti reprint of it. That's something I occasionally look for. I don't see all that often. The concrete shirts, you know, Paul Chadwick stuff is beautiful. I have 2 concrete shirts. I would love to see if there's more than the 2 that I have out there. I have a feeling maybe they're not. Occasionally I try to find Dave Sim Cerberus shirts because I love his art style, but I sometimes feel like if I wear a David Sim shirt, if anybody knows who he actually is and his politics are, it's almost like wearing a MAGA hat.
Oh, is it really?
He's kind of great. He's very misogynistic, and I'm sure you can get that if you read through the entire series. But he's
Isn't that
definitely
Bisley too? Like, isn't Bisley kind of
I don't know what Bisley's thing is. Dave Sim feels like he's kind of like a pre-incel, you know, and kind of like his the way he thinks or approaches things. But I still love his art, and I love the character, and like I love what he did for comics at the time. Oh, I would absolutely kill for a Mirage Studios from the era Ninja Turtle shirt that's either an Eastman or a Laird version of
make those.
Yes, those definitely existed. They used to sell them in the back of the comics or back of the issues. I would absolutely kill for one of those. I don't care if it's an Eastman or if it's in a Laird. I love both of their styles.
That's amazing. Wow, those would be cool. I'm surprised they don't reprint those at Target.
I've seen one recently that didn't go for that much. But the print on it and like the way the graphic was reproduced, it just didn't do anything for me. It was just like I wouldn't have worn it. I would also love an Usagi Yojimbo shirt.
Yeah.
Someone recently put one up for sale. I asked him what he was looking for. He told me he couldn't part with it for less than $500. I'm like, I'm not giving you $500 for a Usagi Yojimbo shirt. I have a feeling that like I'll probably come across one for a much more reasonable price over the course of my collecting. But then again, he's not that obscure of a character. People have an association with him because of Ninja Turtles who are collecting. So maybe I'm wrong.
Who's buying them for 500? Are they going or do they sit?
I don't know. I never asked him if he ended up selling them. He told me that the high offer, somebody offered him 400, whether they did or didn't, but that's what he said. So someone clearly wanted to pay for it. And I guess I've seen one go up on eBay where it went up, and when my alert went off, and when I went to get it, just check it out, it already sold, and it sold for I think $250 or $300. So clearly there's value.
Do you know how like the Titanic VHS is like the joke is that every flea market has a bunch of the Titanic VHSs because they mass produce them. Are there any t-shirts that are from the vintage era that are the Titanic of comic book tees, or it's just they are always around?
I don't think I could pinpoint to one shirt, but definitely McFarlane Spider-Mans are not that high in demand because they made so many different ones of them. Like there were like, you know, Comic Images, Talking Tops, and Marvel were you know, pimping out McFarlane Spider-Man left and right. So there's so much of that stuff. So even when you see one, and I've seen ones that I've never seen before, people selling, like, you know, when certain comic tees are getting $1,500 to $5,000, when you see one that you've never seen before and someone's only asking for $200 to $300, you could see that like his stuff isn't as in demand just because there's so much of it. But there are other ones that are kind of like I have one that's his assassination plot cover where it's Spidey and Captain America, and that one would probably fetch a lot because you don't see a Todd McFarlane Captain America shirt all that often.
That's a good cover too.
Yeah, and it's such a strange looking Captain America. He's very cartoony and like broad, but it's great. It's both bad and incredible all at the same time.
What about Batman shirts? Those are around a lot from all the merch, right?
Yeah, they don't go for that much. I mean, I think the prices of those have risen a bunch. I don't remember DC Graffiti did the DC license for a while. You don't see that many, like, which is odd. Either a cache of them hasn't put out there, but I also don't remember them. Outside of like the logo shirts, there are very few DC shirts that are kind of driven by like a graphic.
Yeah.
There's a cool Titan shirt where I think I actually got it once and then I resold it for a little bit more just because it was just too short. And I was like, I'm not going to wear this. I think I have a Joker shirt from, I don't remember if it's pre-movie or post-movie, but it used a comic book comic book art that I liked a lot. It's not that uncommon. You see it come up often. And I have a Lobo shirt that I like. That's like the cover of the first issue.
Do you remember? Go ahead.
No, you don't see that many DC shirts. You think that you would, just, you know, Superman, Batman, Flash, Green Lantern art, but you don't. Or when you do, they're kind of later in the era, nothing that's striking or that grabs you. I did buy a recent DC shirt. That was something that I was looking for a very long time to get. I don't think anybody else cared about it.
What is it?
It was Starman, which is one of my favorite books. But I wanted it because to me it was special because of what it was. But I don't think anybody wanted it, and the dealer wanted a lot for it. And I was like, no one is interested. I get it. The comic book shirts are very hot and popular, but like nobody's gonna pay you this ridiculous price that you're asking for, because I'm the only person looking for a Starman shirt.
Yes.
And even among actual comic fans who are collecting comic shirts, no one's read Starman. Like they haven't. I know it was a popular Vertigo book, but in the grand scheme of popularity in Vertigo, it wasn't even probably top 10 in popularity.
And did the seller concede?
Yeah, he eventually was just like, because I think after like a few months, when he realized that nobody was sending him offers, he was just like, okay, you're clearly the only person interested in this.
Nice work. The long game too.
Oh, I did get a shirt that I didn't know if they existed, but I did get it recently for very, like, I think $20 or $30. But I got a Vertigo promo shirt for Vertigo.
That's cool.
The imprint, not a particular thing. And I wasn't sure if those existed, but suddenly one popped up, and I was just like, it's like a black shirt with black print that says Vertigo, cool. And it has like one of their taglines about, you know, I don't remember what the tagline is, with red across the Vertigo logo. And like, I'm sure nobody else would have wanted it or was looking for it, but I was like, I want a Vertigo logo shirt. I'm not even sure if they exist.
That's super cool.
Oh, definitely one that I would love to find, and I've never been able to find, is a what's his name, Alan Moore era Swamp Thing shirt. I don't know if those exist.
Yeah.
And a Hellblazer Constantine shirt. I know that those exist, but the only ones I've seen with what's his name's art, was it Azzarello who did the cover art
of Hellblazer? Were they paintings? Weren't they paintings?
Yeah, they were paintings, but I tend to put preference to comic shirts that have the title of the comic with the illustration, rather than ones that just have an image on them.
There wasn't Dave McKeon who did the Hellblazer stuff? No,
he did the Sandman covers.
Right, I know that. He didn't do so.
I mean, he may have done some, but like Hellblazer as Tim Bradstreet, that's who it was.
Cool. Yeah, those covers are pretty cool.
Brian Azzarello, the writer, right? I think I may have just confused.
He's the 100 Bullets guy, right? And Batman.
Yeah, that's the writer. Maybe Brian Azzarello. I think Azzarello eventually wrote Hellblazer, maybe after Ennis or whoever was doing it for a while. But yeah, I'd love one of those, but I've never seen one with. I've seen one. There's only one I've ever seen, and it doesn't say Hellblazer on it. It just has the thing. Just has like a cover painting. Oh, you know what? I'm looking at it now, and it does look like, from what I can tell, it looks like McKean did do some Hellblazer covers. I think he did.
I was right. Yeah.
I think he did the cover to #1. That actually, I think he did the cover to the first one. Those actually would make incredible shirts.
Yeah,
they're in the same vein of the old Sandman.
You see Sandman T-shirts out there, right? I've seen.
Yeah, I've never seen a Sandman. I have one Sandman T-shirt, and I think it's from like the very early 2000s, and it's cool. I've never seen. I love Sandman.
Sam Keith too. He did the first. Yeah. Is it first run or the first issue or whatever? Yeah.
I've never seen one where I'm like, this is an incredible Sandman shirt, and it's like weird. Is like, I don't understand how. I don't know what was going on with DC to like, or whatever licensing. Like, why can't you come up with a great Sandman shirt? It's like there's so many striking graphics from Sandman that you couldn't make a great shirt, and they just never did. Maybe they exist and I just never seen them. But I feel like I've seen the same 10 or so cycle through over and over again, and they're just not. They're not striking. They don't capture what's so incredible about the book.
Yeah, you could probably just take straight pages and just put them on a T-shirt, and it'd be awesome.
You could just take some of the covers, and I don't get what they were doing. I feel like they were trying to cater the shirts to almost to people who are into Tori Amos.
Right.
Like that isn't probably where you should be going. And I'm just saying that, just knowing that that Gaiman was friends and with Amos, and he modeled Delirium after Amos. And
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's who Delirium is modeled after.
Uh-huh. That makes sense. Well, if you see Mike Bortnik on the street, give him props on his t-shirt because he deserves it. All right, man. Thanks so much.